Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight,
our community will not be packed in a way that dilutes our representation.
City Council members are at loggerheads over drawing new ward maps.
And with only hours left before that deadline, organizations are calling for city leaders to consider their maps.
The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation.
A driving force behind Illinois' same-sex marriage law says he won't be seeking re-election to the General Assembly.
Remembering a true giant of musical theater, Stephen Sondheim, with stage director Gary Griffin and arts critic Hetty Weiss.
And Geoffrey Baer has the story of a famous Chicago nightclub in tonight's Ask Geoffrey. But first, some of today's top stories. Chicago Public Schools will begin a COVID-19 test-to-stay pilot program for students this week. It's an effort to reduce the number of students required to quarantine because of COVID-19. The program would allow unvaccinated students to stay in school after a coronavirus exposure under a strict testing regimen. CPS has more than 5,000 individuals quarantining as of Monday, according to district data. Of those, about 4,900 are students, 185 are adults. School CEO Pedro Martinez says the district will begin the pilot at one school this week.
The goal for our test to stay is just to start small but expand it throughout the school year, because we don't know, I can't predict for you when COVID will be at 0 cases. So not knowing that, I'd rather just really plan for the long term so that we just keep building it up through the end of the school year and really, if necessary, through the beginning of the next school year.
Mayor Lori Lightfoot arrives in Washington, D.C. today to meet with senior White House officials. They're expected to discuss Chicago's pandemic recovery plan and the city's infrastructure priorities. Lightfoot is set to be in D.C. through the end of the week. This means the mayor will miss the last day of debate on the ward remap and a potential vote among city council members this week. We'll hear more from alderpeople coming up in the program. The state's Attorney General's office is working with CVS Pharmacy in an effort to prevent robberies and reduce retail crime. Attorney General Kwame Raoul and representatives from CVS are announcing new technology in place at all of the retailer's pharmacy locations in Illinois. The company is rolling out new time delay safes, which delay the time it takes for pharmacy employees to open them. Officials hope this will deter robberies and keep customers and employees safe.
Thieves intending to run into a pharmacy, steal a controlled substance, and flee will instead be met with these safes that require a code to enter. The code begins a timer and the safe will not open until the timer expires, preventing thieves from accessing these drugs.
The move comes as part of the Attorney General's Organized Retail Crime Task Force, which works to foster collaboration between retailers, law enforcement, and state's attorneys. Up next, the clock is running out on drawing ward maps. 4 city council members share the latest. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
With the deadline looming tomorrow, tensions are running high over drawing Chicago's new ward map, which will determine the distribution of power in City Hall for the next decade. If that vote doesn't happen tomorrow, it triggers a possible public referendum where voters could make the final decision. And here to talk about the latest are Alderman Scott Waguespack of the 32nd Ward on the north side, Alderman Gilbert Villegas of the 36th Ward on the northwest side and chair of the Latino Caucus, Alderman Stephanie Coleman, who represents the 16th Ward on the southwest side. She is the vice chair of the Black Caucus. And Alderman Jason Irvin, who represents the 28th Ward on the west side and chairs the Black Caucus. Let's get right into it and lay out the stakes. A map must pass with 41 votes tomorrow, or it triggers a public referendum where voters could choose on potentially multiple maps. And at this point, there are no 41 votes, there's no agreement, there's lots of acrimony. Alderman Waguespack, what's the very latest?
Well, I think we're meeting tomorrow in hopes of continuing some negotiations, and we've got 2 of the main caucus chairs here and the vice chairwoman. And I think that, what we're going to try to do, as we always do in this council, is to sit down and try to work things out with this map. These are very difficult maps to work on. You know, we just went through a major budget session. People have been diligently working together, and I think that will continue here. So I'm hoping to see what comes up tomorrow, but we could go to referendum. I think everybody's trying to hope to.
And Alderman Coleman, the central dispute here has been that the Latino caucus has proposed 2 more Hispanic majority wards than it currently has, reflecting population gains there. It would come at the expense of black majority wards, reflecting population loss in that community. Do you see any compromise here?
You know, I have to divert to our chairman, Chairman Urban, because the priority is based on populations that we finally have an opportunity to unify those South Central communities like mine in Inglewood, Chicagoland, Gage Park, back of the city. And our number is our number, and our number is our number. And I'll divert to Chairman Urban.
All right, you do chair the Black Caucus, Alderman Irvin. Is there a compromise with the Latino caucus, which has said that the outlines of a proposal you put out is not tenable?
Well, again, we always want to look at what's best, what's fair, and what's equitable for Chicago as a whole. And again, if there's a room to have a conversation, there's always a possibility of reaching an agreement. However, those agreements cannot harm protected classes. And unfortunately, we have not found that common ground at this point. But again, there's still time for us to get there if we could, have a meeting of the
Is 17 African-American majority wards your red line? You're not going to go below that?
No, we believe that that is the proper number for our community, as we feel the number of 14 is proper for the Latino community. And again, I think that if we look at what can actually be sustainable as wards for both communities, I believe some of the things that have been proposed are not sustainable for both communities. In my opinion, it does not make sense to potentially create a ward that on paper may say one thing, but in reality is something else. I think we need to be honest with the citizens of our city and honest with ourselves of what we're actually doing, and not play games with our communities in respect to what we're saying and what we're doing. So that's why I think we should work.
As we sit here, it looks like there will be no 41 votes tomorrow, no agreement to Alderman Villegas. If that's the case, what is next for the Latino caucus? Because it's clear that the Latino caucus and the Black caucus are still pretty far apart on what they want.
Well, I'd say that we're not too far apart. The reality is that if there could be some real candid discussions, compromise, we have a problem right now with the process that's occurring within the Rules Committee, where the quote unquote, some of the aldermen are locked in. I can tell you that our community is being locked out because of the fact that we are being forced to draw wards within boundaries, artificial boundaries that have been put forward by the Rules Committee. And that's an issue. Listen, we always want to negotiate. I think that we have a great relationship within the City Council. We don't want to put have to go to referendum. It would cost millions of dollars. We would also potential litigation. I think there's always the opportunity. And I would mention that Latinos are a protected class as well. And that's where you see the interesting pattern here, is that you have 2 protected classes that are trying to make sure that their communities are being represented fairly. And I think if we continue to have discussions, we can get there.
Alderman Wagasback, an X factor here is Mayor Lori Lightfoot, who campaigned on an independent process, although she has not supported the so-called People's Map. This process has been, like it always is, backroom. Has the mayor broken her promise here?
No, I don't think so. I think the People's Map, they had some good ideas, but they kind of went off on their own and did their own thing. 10 years ago when we were looking at making some changes, we asked to put some guidelines in, and that didn't really happen. But I don't think she's broken her promise here. The aldermen have been working pretty diligently on this. She has stayed on the sidelines and watched and let us do our process. But I think, what we're going to see, some people have said, will she veto any map? And I don't think she will, and I don't think she can. Once you realize once you get to 34 members, that's veto proof. So I don't think she's tinkering around here. I think she's allowing the city council to do its job.
All right, and every remap, there's some casualties of incumbents. Alderman Coleman, your ward is one that could be redrawn and effectively draw you out. Are you concerned about that?
My concern is to create a compact and continuous 16th ward so I can properly focus on those innovative strategies and investing in communities like Inglewood, Chicago Line, New City, Gage Park, not political pettiness. We need to come together and get to 41.
Alderman Irvin, you've released like general zones for your map, but no one's actually seen your specific ward map. And if it's voted on tomorrow, that means the public won't be able to see it before it's voted on, won't be able to weigh in. How does that square with transparency?
I think it does deal with the transparency because we talk about areas of our city. And what we talk about are the south and west sides. We talk about the southwest side. We talk about the northwest side. And we also talked about the creation of an Asian ward. And these are things that have not happened before. And again, we don't want to be offensive to communities by drawing lines. We think the representatives of those communities need to be the ones who are engaged in the process and draw the lines. And I think that's where a lot of the acrimony started in this process, when others draw lines for other people that don't necessarily know and understand our communities. And so that's where we wanted those individuals who are most impacted to draw those lines.
All right, we're going to leave this conversation right now. We're going to pick it up later in the show. All four aldermen will be back later in the program to continue this discussion. But for now, our thanks to Alderman Scott Waguespack, Gilbert Villegas, Stephanie Coleman, and Jason Irvin. And now to Amanda with a high-ranking state lawmaker who's announcing he's stepping back. Amanda.
Paris, a prominent state legislator is leaving the General Assembly. House Majority Leader Greg Harris is the highest-ranking openly gay lawmaker in Illinois history. He represents parts of Northwest Chicago, including Uptown, Lincoln Square, and West Ridge. But after 15 years, he's ready to move on. And joining us now to reflect on his career is Democratic State Representative Greg Harris. We appreciate your joining us. Now, you aren't going to run for re-election next year. What brought you to that decision?
We have two-year terms, Amanda, as you know, and every 2 years it's time to sit down and think, is it time to get back on the ballot, or is it time to move on? And this year I thought it was just time to move on. I'll have served 16 years at the end of my term, and that's been a good long time, and I got a lot of good things done.
So a quick clarification, just a yes, no, you are going to serve out the whole remainder of this term?
That's my plan.
That's the plan. All right. And you're a man who generally sticks to it. So speaking of plans, you were a driving force behind the 2013 law that legalized same-sex marriage. It narrowly passed the House that November, but a half a year earlier, you faced heavy criticism from gay rights advocates for not bringing the bill to the floor then. This is how you responded.
The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. Thank you.
So what were your emotions at that time as an openly gay man? It had to have been incredibly hard to face criticism that you received, including from people who were your allies.
And that recording did not pick up all the booing of the people who were in the gallery that day. A lot of people wanted the bill to go up on the board, even if it was going to lose. And it was a strategic call. It was, in my opinion, it was better to be sure something like that went on the board to win, not to fail, because Illinois was widely seen as the last state that could possibly pass marriage equality. There was a case on its way through the Supreme Court, and a loss could have potentially affected that, as could have a win. It was President Obama's home state at the time, and to lose then would have been a very bad signal. So at the end of the day, it was a tough decision, but in something like this, where millions of people's lives were going to be affected, making sure that we did it and we won was really important. And the state mobilized, people got together, we worked in every one of the 102 counties, and the bill passed in a bipartisan way that November and was signed into law.
And do you see that as your greatest legacy? Perhaps you can speak to even just 3 years earlier, 2010, you sponsored the civil union proposal, and that too barely passed. So what changed in that quick period?
What changed was the people of the state of Illinois. And if you look at the history of public opinion polling and, track the issue of, approval of, same-sex marriage over just the last 10, 12, 14 years, it has been one of the most rapid changes on a major hot-button social issue that, public opinion research has tracked. And a lot of that was due to just average people in every corner of the state, coming out and telling their story in their own way, not necessarily becoming big advocates or activists or those kind of things all the time, but just telling their story about who they are and who they love and who their family is, to their neighbors and to their friends and to their coworkers and to the people they worship with in church, mosque, or synagogue. And that changed people's minds when they could understand that, all anyone wanted was to love their partner, love their families, and have a safe home and a happy home and contribute to the community. And that changed minds.
You did rise in the ranks in the Illinois House, including serving as the point man for former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan, particularly on the budget. So how do you feel about his fall from power?
Well, obviously that was a very difficult situation. And he left. Our caucus rallied around and found a new direction. And now we're serving under our first African-American speaker in the 203-year history of Illinois, Chris Welch. And he's leading us in a new direction. It's a new style of leadership. It's far more open, far more inclusive. And the caucus is doing great things. This year we passed a really trend-setting, historic clean energy and climate bill that is a model for the nation, and it's going to help us, eliminate carbon in our state, electrify our vehicles, all kinds of benefits there. We have moved in advance of potentially what will happen in the Supreme Court starting this week to protect women's reproductive health. Illinois has codified a lot of the things that are protected in Roe into our state law so that they are not at risk nationally.
And you have been involved in so much of that, including, as I said, the budget. So assess the state's finances. Illinois' bond rating is up, sure, but what hard choices is Illinois going to face as federal COVID relief funding dries up? I mean, are we really just on a short-term sugar high?
No, I think we're on a hard path walking up. We've made great strides, but obviously you mentioned what's going to happen with COVID. I don't think any of us know how that's going to affect our budget, the revenue or federal assistance or whatever. But for right now, we're making progress. We've paid down $3 billion in debt. We've reduced our bill backlog from $17 billion to under $2 billion. We're paying our pension funds every year, the amount that we're supposed to be paying them. And we've had the first bond rating increases in a quarter of a century. And people who make their living assessing risk and financial performance have said to Illinois, you're on the right path. So our challenge in the next couple of years is stay on that path.
And you will not be there in the Springfield. Now, one last question. We've got just about a minute left. You do live openly as someone who is HIV positive, and of course there is no cure. So in this brief time, what do people need to know about HIV and AIDS today?
That it is another pandemic just like COVID, and it's one that has been with us, but one that can be, if you're tested and if you get modern treatment, it's just these days a chronic illness that can be managed. But there's also PrEP, so you can do prevention. And there are just many tools at people's disposal, and you should ask your doctor about it. Ask your local health center about PrEP and testing and treatment to be sure that you're living your best life.
And of course, another big part of your legislative legacy, working on issues related to health care and Medicaid. We hope you stay well. Thank you for your time. Representative Greg Harris, not running for re-election next year.
Thank you.
Up next, remembering the life and legacy of the late composer Stephen Sondheim. Stay with us.
Spend Saturday evening with the Voices of Chicago. Latino Voices at 6 and Black Voices at 6:30. See you on Saturdays. Stephen Sondheim was widely considered the most revered creator of American musical theater since the 1950s. He died Friday at the age of 91 at his Connecticut home. Over the years, Chicago was home to many acclaimed productions of Stephen Sondheim's works, including one inspired by a famous painting at the Art Institute. Here's a look at Sunday in the Park with George at the Chicago Shakespeare Theater. And joining us now are the director of that and many other Sondheim shows, Gary Griffin, and our own arts critic, Hetty Weiss. Welcome back, both of you, and thank you for joining us to talk about this. Gary Griffin, let's start with you, please. Obviously, a very unique Chicago connection there. What goes through your mind when you hear or see that clip?
Well, I feel really a lot of hometown pride in it because we get to have the source material for one of, well, my favorite Sondheim show, and I think one of the great ones. I remember when I saw the number on the Tony Awards in 1984, and they did the end of Act One where they create the painting. Within a week, I drove to Chicago. I was living with my parents in Rockford at the time. Drove to Chicago to see the painting because I wanted to get that connection. It was great to, twice we did productions at Chicago Shakes of the show, just knowing that was, when we sang that song, across the way was the painting itself. And in 2006, we did a concert in Grant Park where we ended with Sunday as well. And, it's just an amazing, first of all, it's a great work of art that inspired a great work of art. And I was very touched the last time I was there to visit the painting. The musical is now mentioned in the accompanying words about the painting in the Art Institute.
And Gary, we also have a picture of you with Mr. Sondheim, as well as Chicago Shakespeare Theater's Barbara Gaines. What was he like in person? Very
articulate, compelling, smart, very funny, and very passionate about anything. He liked to debate. He liked to really probe the depths of any subject. And if there weren't any depths, he wasn't very interested in it. But he was a very inspiring person to spend some time with because, you can think you care about what you do, and then you're around him and realize this is someone who the depths of his passion and commitment to the art form is staggering.
And Hetty, we also have a clip coming up of Sweeney Todd at Paramount Theater in Aurora. This show has also been done at Lyric Opera and tiny storefront theaters. What does that tell us about the scale of Sondheim's appeal?
Well, it's fascinating. He, of course, most of his work was debuted on Broadway, or at least the important production, debuted on Broadway. So who would have thought that you could do it in a tiny theater like Porchlight or Theo Ubique or, whatever, but also, having it done on the stage of the Paramount Theater in Aurora or having it at Chicago Shakespeare Theater, it held its own. And I think why it held its own is just because he chose fabulous subjects. He dealt with everything about relationships, but it wasn't just, it wasn't just on marriage, although marriage was a subject of many of his works. It was really about, it was about fame. It was about success. It was about revenge. There were so many themes, and they were set in so many places. The show that Gary really forged his association with Sondheim with was Pacific Overtures, which I think is unbelievably ignored, and it's brilliant. And it's about a young Japanese boy who sees Commodore Perry coming in to open Japan in the 19th century, and then he's looking back at it. And the songs, the songs in every show are just so extraordinary.
Well, and one of those shows, Hetty, tell us a little bit about his last musical, Roadshow, which tried out at the Goodman Theater before it wound up at the Chicago Shakespeare Theater with a new name.
Right. Well, that was a problematic show. It was about two brothers, very different personalities, and trying to find success and not getting along. And I think the score, as always, is wonderful. I think maybe the storytelling needed a little bit of tweaking or whatever, but I also think that Gary found a way, to get into it.
And Gary, you also directed Gypsy, one of several early shows, including West Side Story, that Sondheim wrote the lyrics but not the music. Earlier in his career, he had to be more of a team player, but he had some great mentors as well.
Well, I think those experiences, and first of all, they're two classics. I mean, the quality of the lyric writing, particularly in, well, I think in both of them, but particularly in Gypsy, is, I mean, among all the artistic departments of that piece, the lyric writing is as first-rate as anything. And I think he was wise and counseled by Oscar Hammerstein, although he wanted to write music and lyrics, to take those projects and have the opportunity to work and be mentored further by Leonard Bernstein and Jerome Robbins, Arthur Lawrence, and Julie Stein. So they were very crucial to his development as an artist, and at the same time, they're just staggeringly brilliant.
Right, and the one thing, that I heard him talk to Patty Lupone about, and he does not like being interviewed, but he was very, very gracious with Patty. And he cursed himself for not having exactly the right accent on a word in one of the songs in West Side Story, which was fascinating because he did not believe in twisting the singing of the words, which were very important to him, to meet the music or to make a comic point. He was so fastidious about language, and so when people compare him, they call him the musical theater Shakespeare. He really did earn that title.
And before we let you go, obviously, we're talking about him being this, spectacular wordsmith. Gary, I'll ask you first. Do you have a favorite lyric?
De Maupassant's candor would cause her dismay. The Brontes are grander, but not very gay. Her taste is much blander, I'm sorry to say, but is Hans Christian Andersen ever risque? It's a lyric from A Little Night Music.
All right, you called that one up quickly, which means it was right there on the tip of your tongue.
I mean, I have many, but that one always, if I just want to go, my God, how could you do that? It's, that's the one I pull up.
Okay, Gary Griffin and Hetty Weiss, thanks to you both for joining us.
Thank you.
And on our website, there is more from Hetty Weiss on memorable productions of Stephen Sondheim shows in Chicago. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, the fight over the new ward map is coming down to the wire. City council members weigh in on the power struggle. Meanwhile, community groups push city leaders to consider their independently drawn maps amid the ward map battle. And Geoffrey Baer shares the story behind an iconic Chicago folk music club in this week's Ask Geoffrey. But first, some more of today's top stories. Cook County's homicide rate is the highest it has been in decades. The county has confirmed 1,009 homicides so far this year, according to the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office. The last time Cook County surpassed 1,000 homicides was in 1994. This year, 81% of homicide victims were African American, 15% were Latino, and 92% of homicides so far have been gun-related. Chicago officials removed California, North Carolina, and Guam from the city's COVID-19 travel advisory. 38 states remain on the advisory, seen here in orange. Now, that includes nearby Minnesota, Michigan, and Wisconsin, which health officials say had the highest rates of confirmed cases. City officials say unvaccinated travelers should get tested 3 to 5 days before they leave, and upon their return. Even if they receive a negative test, they should self-quarantine for 7 days. Now, this comes as the city is bracing for the Omicron variant.
We are well placed to detect Omicron variant, and we likely will soon. I am not concerned about detecting the variant. I'm concerned about how we respond to it. No, the sky is not falling, but we need to be serious, and we need to get people vaccinated now.
President Joe Biden signs a bill strengthening maternity care for veterans. The bipartisan Protecting Moms Who Served Act creates a $15 million program to support maternal care at the Department of Veterans Affairs. It'll also study what maternal health issues veterans are facing. Illinois Congresswoman Lauren Underwood is one of the bill's sponsors and has led this effort. The bill is the first of 12 in the so-called Momnibus package, which is part of the Build Back Better Act. The Black Maternal Health Caucus created the legislation to address pregnancy-related deaths in the U.S., which disproportionately impact Black people. The city's annual overnight parking ban goes into effect early tomorrow morning. The ban covers 107 miles of arterial streets from 3 a.m. to 7 a.m. It's a precautionary measure in case the city needs to plow city streets, but remains in effect even if it does not snow. Another 500 miles of streets prohibit parking after 2 inches or more of snow should fall. Cars in no parking zones will receive a $60 ticket, a $150 tow fee, and face a storage fee of $25 per day. And now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. Earlier in the program, we discussed the battle over the new ward map, which will determine the power distribution in City Hall for the next 10 years. And we're joined again by Alderman Scott Waguespack, Gilbert Villegas, Stephanie Coleman, and Jason Irvin. Alderman Waguespack, the mayor announced that she is going to D.C., in fact, is likely already there at this point. She's going to miss the final hours of the negotiation here. She is not going to preside over this meeting where a map could be voted on. Is that problematic?
No. So Alderman Riley would take over the seat as the temporary chair, and the aldermen would still be able to have their vote and have the discussion in the public setting.
But Alderman Coleman, shouldn't the mayor be a part of this? This is a big vote. This is a historic vote, and the mayor rarely ever misses city council meetings.
I think we've got this.
All right. Short and to the point. So that tells me that the mayor's role here isn't very substantive in this debate, at least at this point going forward. Alderman Irvin, the person in the Rules Committee that's leading the drawing of the map, Mike Casper, longtime counsel to former House Speaker Mike Madigan. There are older people that are crowing that one of Casper's chief goals here is to protect the turf of Madigan protege, 13th Ward Alderman Marty Quinn, and indicted 14th Ward Alderman Ed Burke. Is that what this map is going to do?
That's not about this process. This process has been open and a transparent process to the members of the council. The Rules Committee has been operating in a very open way. All of us have had opportunities to come in and draw and look at different iterations of the map. And I do not believe that anyone is trying to, quote unquote, protect anyone. These are two predominantly Latino wards. And I think that however those wards are done will work to the advantage of the Latino community, as they're both predominantly Latino wards.
Alderman Villegas, do you see that behind the scenes happening here? 14th Ward Alderman Ed Burke trying to exert some influence, and 13th Ward Alderman Madigan protege Marty Quinn to protect their jobs?
I would say that of all the attorneys that are in Chicago, we have to pick, the committee rules has to hire Mike Casper, who currently is defending the state in a lawsuit with MALDEF and NAACP around discrimination from Latinos for shortchanging them out of district, as well as African Americans down in East St. Louis area. So of all the council that's out there, we pick Mike Casper, and those same type of antics around discrimination around Latinos is occurring right now. And I think that this is just a ploy to disenfranchise Latinos. The reality is that this has been the least transparent process in probably the city's history. We are going to see a map tomorrow for the first time. 14 members of the city council have yet to see a map, and we'll be seeing it for the first time tomorrow, and then being asked to whether support it or not support it.
All right. So Alderman Irvin, I'll give you a chance to respond since he's talking about the map that you want to unveil. What's your response to that?
I totally disagree with that. Again, Alderman Villegas and other members of the caucus have been able to be part of the process, and they decided to stand up their own process. And in the process of doing that, decided to create what I would consider to be a weak Latino ward in a way that is what I would consider to be a moral victory, but electorally will lose Latino members of this body. I do not want to be part of a mapping process that reduces the voting strength of the Latino community nor do I want to be part of a process that reduces the voting strength of the African American community. I took you at your word the last time we were here, Alderman Villegas, and you asked us to look at the ways to create a 15th ward without harming the African American community. But even though it didn't harm the African American community, it harmed your community so much that you chose not to do that. And that's why we believe that 14 is the appropriate number, because it continues to put Latino majority wards in the low to mid 50% range, which we know are not effective Latino majority wards in the city of Chicago.
The problem there is that the maps that are currently stood up in the black wards that are being stood up are being backfilled once again by the Latino population, not having the ability to create its own ward. When you take a look at the Chicago Lawn area in Marquette Park, there's 80,000 Latinos that are there, which could create a new ward. However, 54,000 of them are being used as backfill.
So basically, you're saying that this could be diluting the Latino vote. So you two clearly don't disagree. Alderman Coleman, doesn't look like there's any agreement. Is this going to go to public referendum? What's so bad about that? What's so bad about having voters choose on their maps?
You know, I know that this is a very contentious time. Drawing a map is never easy, but we're all fighting for the same thing: better schools, job opportunities, and addressing violence in the city. It happens on the south side, it happens on the west side, on the north side. That is the goal here. And I am very hopeful for a successful meeting on tomorrow.
On a lower level, Alderman Waguespack, Lincoln Yards, the massive new proposed development, is playing into this a bit. It's currently in the 2nd Ward. Alderman Hopkins has that seat right now. You want it in the 32nd Ward, which is the ward that you're the alderman of. Why is that?
Well, it always used to be in the 32nd Ward. Remember in the last map, the 2nd Ward was drawn up like a snake up through the Park area. And what we're trying to do is just make our ward compact, contiguous, and part of the community that it was in the first place. So this literally kind of just draws the lines back to where they were and provides community input and community content.
Can I ask which map, though, would give that to the 32nd Ward?
Right now, it would be the citywide map.
The citywide map, so not the Latino caucus map?
No, under that map, I was one of the people who went to the offsite Latino caucus map room, and I talked to them about that, and they couldn't agree that that was a good idea. So I said I couldn't support that map, and based on community preferences. And I think that's, it's one piece of a much larger puzzle that aldermen are working on, but I think it's an important one because of the future of the area for decades to come.
Alderman Villegas, if you had to wager a guess here, is it pretty clear that there will not be 41 votes tomorrow? This is not going to get resolved, and it will go to public referendum.
Oh, I'm going to say that the 41 votes are not there. But as you stated earlier, there still is an opportunity to try to come to 41 after December 1st, but that'll have to happen real quickly. And also, again, people will have to come to the table willing to compromise. And Paris, let me just correct you for a second. I didn't agree that those wards were diluted. The way that we draw our wards in the Chicago Coalition map actually strengthen the Latino wards as well as the African American wards. So, and creates the first Asian ward at 51%. So it creates 3 majority minority wards.
And that first Asian ward is one thing that you do agree on. There's been a big campaign for that. And just to clarify for our viewers, as I understand, even if there is no agreement tomorrow and it does go to referendum, you can find 41 votes somewhere in the next 5-6 months, and that referendum would be canceled. So it's not exactly a hard deadline, but it's something that clearly you all do want to wrap up by tomorrow. But we have to wrap this discussion up right now. Our thanks to Alderman Scott Waguespack, Gilbert Villegas, Stephanie Coleman, and Jason Irvin. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And up next, more on the city ward remap with a critic of how this process has been handled. But first, we take a look at the weather. So I'm not sure anything was resolved there. You just heard the confusion surrounding tomorrow's deadline on a new Chicago ward map. And now we speak with an organization known as the Chicago Advisory Redistricting Commission. They have blasted both the mayor and alderpeople for failing to allow an independent remap process. The map that they have proposed is called the People's Map, which has proposed wards that keep neighborhoods together, but it would result in a very high rate of turnover in City Council. And joining us to comment on the City Ward Remap battle is Madeline Dubeck, Executive Director of Change Illinois. Madeline Dubeck, thanks for being back with us. So you put out a statement today, not mincing words, blaming the mayor for breaking a campaign promise to support an independent process. She did not get on board with your map. How big are the stakes here?
Look, the stakes are very big. This is the foundation of the democracy for the city of Chicago, and the people deserve to have a voice and a vote, and they're not getting it from this council process that you've seen play out here. The People's Map creates 37 majority-minority wards, more than any other, and it was the first to create the Asian American majority ward. But beyond that, there were real people from the city of Chicago who had a stake and a voice in this process that was completely transparent. And, you know, hundreds and hundreds of people came to meetings at nights and on weekends that were all live streamed. Every bit of it was public, and they want to have a say in their neighborhoods. And this commission really listened to the people and created this People's Map. It's a great opportunity at this moment now for aldermen and alderwomen and alderpeople to support the people that they have supposed to have been representing all this time.
We've asked alderpeople about transparency. As you just heard, the map supported by the Black Caucus won't even be seen until tomorrow, and that's the day they're supposed to vote. The Latino Caucus put out their own map, but what they say is, well, the public gave us input, and we took that input into account. Is that a public or transparent process?
The fact that we have not seen a map yet is reprehensible. It's simply reprehensible. Not in the least transparent. Nothing about this process has been transparent. You know, as Alderman Villegas said, it's the worst transparency ever, and that's saying something given the years that this process was run by Ed Burke and Dick Mell. You know, the people deserve meaningful input. These wards do not belong to the alderpeople of the council. The wards belong to the people of the city of Chicago. They have participated in this process, and they deserve to have a vote. When members of the city council draw their own wards, they're rigging the system from its foundation, and they're suppressing the votes of the people. This is about incumbent protection, and it's time for it to end.
Besides process, what are the main things about the ward map that you put out that are different than these maps being talked about?
Look, the very most important thing is that this People's Map truly is compact and contiguous. This commission of diverse average residents from all over the city of Chicago worked very hard over June, July, August, and September to draft this map after listening to public input from real people throughout Chicago. And they uplifted and upheld the concept of keeping communities whole. That is not something you're going to see in any of these other maps. People in Englewood, Logan Square, Austin, back of the yards now have a chance to have one person to contact when they need help from the city rather than 6 or 7. And that is huge.
And as we know, those neighborhoods you mentioned have been split up into many wards, as many as 5, which has caused all kinds of confusion. This is going to go to referendum, it looks like, unless there's a last-minute deal. You need 10 alderpeople to support the map you've put forward. Is there any chance you're going to get that?
Look, it's not over till it's over. There's always a chance, and I would call upon every member of the city council to step back and think about what they have done to this point. The mayor and many of these council members ran on promises of independent redistricting, doing things differently, ending the history of corruption in the city of Chicago, ending the Chicago way, and now is the chance for them to do that by supporting the people and the people's map.
And you mentioned you have a lot of members of city council that campaigned on these kinds of things, want transparency. Why then is it so hard to get 10 to support what you've put out?
You know, the pull of self-preservation is a very strong one. It's, you know, human nature. I understand that. But, you know, I would also suggest that it's time for the people to hold their elected officials accountable and remember what is going to happen here in the next few days when it comes time for the election. You know, everybody's going to be held to account for their actions that they take. And what we've seen so far is an absolute blockout of meaningful public input in this process that's been run by the City Council and the Rules Committee.
All right, and again, if there is no 41 votes tomorrow, it goes to a referendum in the June midterm primary. The Latino caucus will probably try and get their map on there, other maps likely on there. But here's something that's unusual. They can cancel the referendum if they get 41 votes anytime between now and 40 days before the primary. What do you make of that little wrinkle in the law?
There's always little wrinkles when it comes to activities in the city of Chicago, but there's a chance here to do the right thing, to do right by the people of the city of Chicago who have worked very hard to make their voices heard. You know, 10 years ago when we went through this process, they didn't get to 41 votes until the middle of January. I hope that the people get a chance to choose what map best represents their needs and their communities. I believe that's the people's map. It's been an open and transparent process, and the people deserve to have a voice. That these are their wards. They don't belong to the aldermen.
All right, we'll see what plays out tomorrow. Of course, gerrymandering, a hot topic all over the country with congressional districts and other legislative districts, and here in Chicago with the ward maps. And our thanks to Madeline Dubeck. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Paris.
And up next, the story behind an iconic Chicago folk music club in an encore edition of Ask Geoffrey. So please stay with us.
Ask Geoffrey on WTTW is made possible in part by Binny's Beverage Depot. Since 1948, Binny's has remained local, family-owned, and dedicated to helping you celebrate the best times in your life.
Binny's Beverage Depot toasts Chicago's proud history and its people. Since 1948, Binny's has remained local, family-owned, and dedicated to helping you celebrate the best times of your life.
It's been a tough year for Chicago's music venues, shuttered since March because of the pandemic. But the city's rich history of live performances lives on. In this week's Ask Geoffrey, we have the story of a Chicago nightclub that helped launch the careers of artists like Peter, Paul, and Mary, Shel Silverstein, and many more. And joining us now with more is Geoffrey Baer. Welcome back, Geoffrey.
Hi, Brandis.
So this question is, after watching your story on Shel Silverstein, I dug up footage from an old WTTW series called Open Air from 1972, which featured an hour-long reunion of the Gate of Horn Club in Chicago. What exactly was the Gate of Horn? That question comes from Rick Garofalo in Park Ridge.
Yeah, so we did this story a few weeks ago about Shel Silverstein, which is what he's referring to. And we want to really thank Rick for sending us the footage, because actually this particular episode of the series was missing from WTTW's own archive. So now we have it. What you're going to see here is a reunion concert of performers who appeared in the iconic Gate of Horn nightclub in Chicago. This was taped almost 50 years ago, Brandis, in a studio right down the hall from where you are sitting right now. By the time this show was made, the Gate of Horn had been closed for years. Our viewer, Rick, was actually at that concert almost 50 years ago, and he was also able to record it at home way back before the days of VCRs, because he was in training back then for his future career as a broadcast engineer in Chicago. So in the late 50s and early 60s, the Gate of Horn, as you mentioned, hosted folk legends like Peter, Paul, and Mary and Joan Baez, and comedy greats like George Carlin, pictured here in 1962, and infamously Lenny Bruce. More on him in a minute. The Gate was one of the first folk music clubs, according to some, even the first folk music club, not just in Chicago, but in the entire United States. when it opened in 1956. Folk clubs became hotbeds of the counterculture movement in the 50s and 60s. The Gate's first home was in the cramped basement of the old Rice Hotel, shown here at the corner of Chicago and Dearborn on the near north side. This is a photo of folk singer Odetta performing on New Year's Eve in 1959 at the Gate. She was one of the club's early regulars, and she went on to influence everybody from Harry Belafonte to Carly Simon. The scene at the club became a tight-knit artistic community, and WTTW tried to recreate that feeling in our studios in 1972 with this reunion concert. Here are Gate regulars Shel Silverstein and George Carlin reminiscing.
And the music was really important, but it really wasn't what it was all about. The people were what it was all about, and the safety and the communication. That's what was really.
The counterculture didn't really have a name or anything identifiable except the music. The coffee houses used folk music, and that's
right.
where you met. So they were.
That's right, and that's where you did everything.
So one of the key figures at the Gate was a local folk singer named Bob Gibson. He often performed with another big name from that time, Hamilton Bob Camp, and they even released a live album recorded at the Gate in 1961.
It's a very cool soundbite to see George Carlin and Shel Silverstein right there. Okay, so Geoffrey, what was behind the club in the first place?
Well, the Gate was founded, as I said, in 1956. The founder was a music manager named Albert Grossman, and he founded the club to showcase his clients and to discover new talent. Grossman would become quite the figure over the next decade, managing a few artists you might have heard of, like Bob Dylan, Janis Joplin, and many more. Grossman would move on from the Gate of Horn in the late 1950s. In April of 1961, his partner, Alan Ribick, opened a swankier standalone version a few blocks north of the original. The new one was at 1036 North State Street. The new club had better sound and was more spacious, but they still hosted folk acts like the Clancy Brothers, shown here in their famous knit sweaters. But slowly, some of the regulars from the old Gate started to fade away.
We're all going to need some knit sweaters very soon, Geoffrey. So you mentioned Lenny Bruce. How does he fit into all this?
Right. Well, so if you've heard of the Gate of Horn, it's possibly because you've heard of Lenny Bruce. He was, this irreverent, crass comedian, famous for his wild jokes and sometimes lewd commentary. In the early 1960s, Lenny Bruce became a target of law enforcement across the country. He was actually charged several times with obscenity and indecency, and that's exactly what happened on a night in December 1962 when Chicago police raided the club and arrested Bruce mid-performance. And that was sort of the beginning of the end for the Gate of Horn. The club had its liquor license revoked temporarily as a consequence of that arrest. The new owners eventually expanded the focus of the club, bringing in blues and jazz, but the magic was sort of gone by that point. The club closed by the mid-1960s. The 1972 reunion show brought many of the old regulars back together, and a new person, a Maywood-born folk legend, John Prine, who missed the Gate's heyday because he was in high school back then. I was a huge fan of John Prine, as so many others were. And as we know, he tragically passed away earlier this year from COVID-19. So let's take a listen to him performing his song, Sing.
There's a hole in Daddy's arm where all the money goes. Jesus Christ died for nothing, I suppose. Little pictures of the year, no fire, sweet songs never last too long on broken radios.
And we want to give special thanks to former folk club owner and musician Ed Holstein, and also to the Newberry Library's Paul DeRica for helping us so much by sharing their expertise with this story.
Okay, my co-anchor Paris Schutz is a big fan of John Prine as well. Thank you very much, Geoffrey Baer. And don't forget that you can visit our website for more details about the Gate of Horn. And while you're there, don't forget to submit your own question to Geoffrey Baer. That's at WTTW.com/AskJeffrey. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And one note before we go. Today is Giving Tuesday, a global initiative that inspires people to come together to help transform their communities. As a nonprofit newsroom, we rely on the support of WTTW members and supporters to help bring trusted, independent news coverage to everyone in our community across our television and digital platforms. And on this Giving Tuesday, there is a special opportunity from an anonymous donor who will match your gift to WTTW up to $150,000. So please consider supporting the essential public service we provide by making a donation online at WTTW.com/GivingTuesday. And thank you. And that is our show for this Tuesday night.
Please join us tomorrow night, live at 7.
Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you all so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and good evening.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm representing dozens of families in the crash of a Boeing 737 MAX 8 jet. Mr. Clifford is the lead counsel in litigation in federal court in Chicago.